All right, let's take a look at the 2018 Dallas Cowboys and look and see what did they do during the 2018 offseason, both in free agency and in the draft. What did they do to try to improve their roster from last season? Well, first let's look at their cap situation. At the beginning of the offseason, they had about $20 million in cap space. Not terrible. And then now in August they have about $11 million in cap space. So they got a little wiggle room there in case maybe they need to bring somebody on or somebody becomes available that they think can fit a need for them. Let's look at some of the players that at the beginning of the offseason I thought might get cut. These are not guys that I thought would definitely get cut. Just guys that I thought the Cowboys would be looking at and consider cutting. Dez Bryant. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't really think they were going to cut him. I really didn't. I knew that they would think about cutting him because he had a $12.5 million salary. He wasn't hitting 1,000 yards receiving anymore. You know, when you look at his 2012, 2013, 2014 season, you're looking at a guy who had, some of the best numbers in the NFL. He was like a, top 2 or 3 wideout in the NFL. 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns. 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns. 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns. Yeah, you definitely pay a guy $12.5 million to put up those kind of numbers. Then he has some trouble in 2015 with injuries. Had 401 yards, but then comes back the next season. 13 games, 796 yards. Played all 16 games last season, had 838 yards and 6 touchdowns. But I think the bigger problem is that he is a cancer. And I think that it's weird to me that these guys, I mean, listen, I get it. First of all, they're awesome. If you're a guy who had, averaged 90 catches and 1,300 yards a season and like 14 touchdowns, and then some, you think you're awesome because you are awesome, and then you're surrounded by people who constantly just tell you whatever you want to hear. You're the greatest ever. You're the greatest ever. Can you imagine someone around Dez Bryant saying, hey, you know what, man? You're not that good anymore. It's impossible. Okay? These guys, their ego gets bigger and bigger. Also, I have no idea what Dez Bryant's family life was like growing up. I could only guess. Okay? And when I say that, just so everybody knows, I'm referring to specifically his attitude and the way that he carries himself. There are plenty of, compare him to Dak Prescott. Totally different demeanor, totally different attitude, and I'm guessing totally different upbringing. Just a guess. I could be wrong, but I doubt I am. So, they just don't get that they're a cancer. And they don't understand why it's important to be a good teammate. They just don't get it. And eventually, an organization is just going to get tired of the BS, and they're going to say, look, we're done. We're paying you $12.5 million. You're not paying us $12.5 million. You're not getting 1,300 yards a season anymore. You're not getting 16 touchdowns. So you know what? Find someone else to pay you millions of dollars. And he just, as you can see here, he only caught about 52% of the passes thrown in his direction since Dak Prescott took over. And they just decided, you know what? Let's go different ways. He's going to turn 30 next season anyway. Just forget it. So, and the interesting thing is he hasn't found any work. He did get, and then he got offered a contract by the Ravens, and I don't know, apparently it was like a decent contract. I have no idea what the term, and he turned it down. Now no one else wants him. The Browns are thinking about it. I'd love for the Browns to get him. I'd like to see the Browns do well. I'd love to see Josh Gordon and Dez Bryant, and then have Jarvis Landry. I would love to see that. But the point is, nobody wants this guy because he's got an attitude problem, and he doesn't get that. Because he's just too egomaniacal. His head is too big. Cole Beasley was another guy that I thought might get cut. My guess is he might be saved because Dez Bryant got cut. They probably couldn't afford to cut both of them. Only had 314 yards last season. It was his worst year since his rookie year. He'll be 29, not young. Would save $3.25 million in the final year of the deal. I tell you, he better show up to this camp and the preseason ready to play. Because he's got a lot better shot of staying around because Dez Bryant is gone. But nothing's ever guaranteed. So Cole Beasley better show up and ready to play. I don't have any problems with Cole Beasley. I'm just saying when your numbers start dropping off, you got to be careful because the NFL isn't the NBA. It's not Major League Baseball. You got to perform every year. Very rarely is a player safe. James Hanna is another guy that I thought might get cut. Wasn't a receiving threat at all. Never even had 100 yards receiving in a season. And sure enough, they cut him. It opened up $2.75 million in cap space. So James Hanna won't be back at tight end. Benson Mayowa was another guy that I thought might get the axe. Had 21 tackles last season, not bad. But, did not have the kind of sack numbers that he put up in the first year of his contract. He's a backup defensive end. You know what I mean? He's a backup defensive lineman, and they were able to save $2.75 million, so they let him go. Tyrone Crawford was another guy that I thought was in jeopardy. Once again, I am not saying that I thought for sure they would cut him. I'm just saying he's a guy that I thought people should keep an eye on. He's still around because it would only save $1.8 million this year. There's too much dead money. But he would have saved a few million more if they made him a post June 1st cut. He's not a bad starting defensive tackle. The question is he worth what he's getting paid? And that's questionable. It's questionable. But so far, Tyrone Crawford will still be around, it looks like. Now let's look at the free agents. Now let's look at the guys who were specifically unrestricted free agents. Alfred Morris is a guy that was an unrestricted free agent. I was happy for him, actually. You can see he had huge years there in Washington. And right up until that last year in 2015, Dallas brings him in. And last season, because of the suspension to Ezekiel Elliott, Alfred Morris was able to run for 547 yards and 4.8 yards a carry. It was good. Solid. Not bad. But he didn't play that much when Elliott came back. So, he played on a 2-year deal that totaled $3.5 million. I think Rod Smith is going to step in there and back up Ezekiel Elliott. And I don't know. Alfred Morris still hasn't found work. It's tough now as a running back, you know. It's so easy for teams to go in and find decent running backs out of college, draft them in the 4th or 5th round, and have them come in and be able to play right away in the NFL. There's just been several examples of players who've been successful, you know, very early on. And so, you know, why pay this guy, you know, $1-2 million when you can get a guy, you know, in the draft and pay him $700,000 and he'll produce, you know, almost as well. Bryce Butler, another wide receiver, free agent. So Dez Bryant got cut, but Bryce Butler had already signed a 2-year, $2.6 million deal with Arizona. I wonder if they would have done it differently, you know, if they had cut Dez Bryant before Bryce Butler signed with Arizona. You know, Butler didn't have a bad season. He's got some wheels on him, and he really wanted to be a starter somewhere, so he tried to find some place where, you know, he could hopefully get some playing time and not be buried on the depth chart. On the offensive line, Jonathan Cooper started at left guard. He played okay, but not great. He wasn't consistent, and suffered a knee injury in the final game. He's had injuries throughout much of his career. Former first-round pick by the Cardinals back in 2013. You know, the Cowboys had signed him to a 1-year, $2 million deal. San Francisco gave him 1 year and $5 million. You know, I think Cowboy fans were quite unhappy with Jonathan Cooper's performance, but interesting that San Francisco thought he was worth $5 million. So, you know, this is another example of one man's trash is another man's treasure. Cowboys decide they had enough of him. But the 49ers, you know, $5 million, that's starting guard money. So we'll see how he does there in San Francisco. Joe Looney was another guy who was a free agent there on the offensive line. He was sort of that swing guard or center, you know, maybe the first guy off the bench kind of guy. He provided solid depth, and he's versatile, can play guard or center. Coming off a 2-year, $1.675 million deal, was a 4th-round pick in 2012, and he got a 2-year, $2 million deal. So he'll be back in Dallas to provide some depth there at guard. On the defense, the big name free agent was DeMarcus Lawrence. Had a huge season finally. Huge season. 58 tackles, 14.5 sacks, 5 tackles for a loss. Has had some back surgeries, has had some off-the-field problems, but the Cowboys couldn't let him just walk, so they tagged him. They'll see if he can replicate that season again. And if they can, I assume they'll probably pay the man. But we'll see how he does, if he can put back-to-back seasons together or not. 2015 also had a good season with 8 sacks, so, you know, if he can stay healthy, you know, he's got a good shot at it at least. So there's DeMarcus Lawrence, a guy to keep your eye on, got the franchise tag this year. Anthony Hitchens was another free agent, linebacker, pretty versatile, could play different spots. 84 tackles last season, 10 tackles for a loss. Very, very good for a guy that was drafted in the 4th round. Like I said, quite versatile. Kansas City signed him to a 5-year, $45 million deal. So I think he'll play inside. He'll replace Derek Johnson there in Kansas City. But that's a pretty hefty contract. $9 million average per year. Anthony Hitchens got paid. but he won't be back with Dallas next year. Kyle Wilbur, another free agent linebacker, not terrible, but also not, great. He had a 2-year deal that was worth an average of $1.6 million a season, and he ended up signing a 2-year deal with Oakland that was worth a total of $2.75 million. So he'll go be a reserve or a backup linebacker there in Oakland. Let's go ahead and summarize these changes to the Cowboys roster. Okay, what were all the major changes? Well, for one, Alfred Morris out. So you can see his numbers there. Was a quality number 2 running back last season for the Cowboys. They brought in Tavon Austin, which, you can see his numbers there. Always had really good yards per carry. He's kind of this gadget guy that can catch the ball and run the ball. You can see that, in 2016, he actually had 509 yards receiving on 58 catches. Way more than yards than he had rushing. I don't know. The Rams had signed him to a really big deal, and I wish I had written down how much it was, but they gave him a lot of money. And they restructured his contract, actually, and so the Cowboys aren't on the hook for, several years anymore, but I think they voided the last couple of years of his contract. But, I will see. Dallas seems very, very optimistic about what he's going to be able to provide the team this year. He might have to with, Dez Bryant out. They'll need to get yards somehow. So it'll be interesting to see how is Austin used. How much is he used as a running back? How much is he used as a wide receiver? That's a guy to keep your eye on this year. Trey Williams, they also signed him. He's been a reserve player most of his career. Bo Scarborough, the Cowboys drafted him in the 7th round. And then Darius Jackson has been a practice squad player most of his career. So overall, when you look at the running back position, probably not a huge drop off. Maybe you could argue maybe they even upgraded it. I don't know. It's pretty steady at the running back position. At wide receiver, this is where it'll get interesting as well. Dez Bryant, his numbers are there to the right. Bryce Butler's numbers are there at the bottom. So those guys are gone. So that's like over 1,000 yards the Cowboys need to replace. How are they going to replace it? Well, they brought in Allen Hurns, who is the number 3 guy in Jacksonville. They brought in Dante Thompson, who is a backup wide receiver. Played for the Bears and I think the Bills. They brought in Michael Gallup. They drafted him in the 3rd round. And all signs point up on him in terms of his performance in training camp. And they also drafted Cedric Wilson in the 6th round. So here's Allen Hurns' numbers. You can see he had a huge 2015 season, but the last couple of years have not been as good. I made a mistake there on the number of games. Obviously, he didn't play in 19 games. It's probably 9 games, but so his numbers were down the last couple of years. Dante Thompson is a guy who had 430 yards in 11 games with the Bills. So, after he got traded from Chicago. So that is a guy who it'll be interesting to watch as well. So, Bryce Butler out, Dez Bryant out, Allen Hurns and Dante Thompson in, plus Michael Gallup. It might be enough. It depends on what kind of year Cole Beasley has. It'll be a real interesting deal to watch the Cowboys offense. Look, you have maybe the best offensive line in the NFL. I'm almost sure you have the best offensive line in the NFL. So hell, you should be. You got Ezekiel Elliott. He'll be able to run the ball. He can catch passes out of the backfield. Maybe it's enough. Maybe it's enough. But this is the other problem you have, is that Jason Witten retired, and James Hanna is out. And how are you going to replace Hall of Famer, future first ballot Hall of Famer Jason Witten? Well, you drafted Dalton Schultz in the 4th round. With all due respect to Dalton Schultz, I doubt he's going to be Jason Witten. Even Jason Witten, in his 14th year in the league, put up 560 yards and 5 touchdowns on 63 catches. Is Dalton Schultz going to get 63 catches and 560 yards his rookie year? I doubt it. That is, it's interesting that Witten decided to retire. He got offered that job, I believe, with ESPN. And I understand it was hard to say no. I'm sure I think he was really torn about whether he was ready to, call it quits or not. But the bottom line is that's a hole in your roster. It really is. And, I'm not 100% sure how you're going to fill it. So it'll be really interesting to watch the Cowboys offense and see how they do. Byron Bell is out. He was a backup tackle, but Cameron Fleming is in, as well as Damian Mama. So, those guys are just depth players, backups in case your starting tackles get injured. At guard, Jonathan Cooper is out, but Connor Williams is in. So, a lot of the Cowboys writers are optimistic that he'll be able to be an upgrade over Jonathan Cooper. They also brought in Marcus Martin to provide some depth in the offseason. At defensive end, Benson Mayoya, backup defensive end, he'll be gone. Demontre Moore was a reserve defensive end. He's gone. And who comes in? Well, they brought in Coney Ealy. He had really big years with Carolina. I really don't know why Carolina let him go. But then last year didn't do all that well as the number 3 defensive end with the Jets. But, the Jets play a 3-4. Maybe it just wasn't a good fit for him. Jihad Ward is in. They made that trade with Oakland to bring in Jihad Ward. I think that was a good deal for the Cowboys. I don't know how much he'll provide. I mean, you can see there, Ward, he was a 2nd-round pick. Had 30 tackles in 16 games as a rookie, but only 2 tackles in 5 games in 2017, and was a healthy scratch for 10 games. So, can't bank on him. And then Dorrance Armstrong, they drafted him in the 4th round. So, overall, probably not any big major drop-off there at defensive end. Stephen Paye retired in the middle of the season last year, so he won't be back. At linebacker, Anthony Hitchens is gone. He had big numbers. You can see those at the bottom of the screen. Justin Durant is gone. He was a backup, but he was going to turn 33 years old. He's a perpetually injured player. And Kyle Wilbur, also gone. He was a reserve linebacker. So how are they going to try to replace these guys? Well, they used their 1st-round pick on Leighton Vander Esch. That one, we'll see. We will see. I read a lot about this guy. He seems to have, quite a lot of talent. Seems to be a really good guy. And, but we'll see. He, comes from a small, very, very small town. And, hasn't played against perhaps the best competition in his life. So, It'll be a jump to the NFL. Joe Thomas, they brought in Joe Thomas, who has been a reserve player, and Chris Covington as well, 6th-round guy. So the bigger news is that Randy Gregory should be back if he doesn't get caught smoking weed again. And that'll be huge. Randy Gregory, that was one of those guys, man. He had failed, I think, several drug tests, certainly at least one at the combine. And, and that's the thing. Listen, whatever you think about marijuana, that's fine. Okay? Everyone's entitled to their own thoughts, their own, opinion. Personally, I think in many states, not in Texas, but apparently in many states it's legal, either for medical purposes, and there's a few states now that it's legal basically for recreational purposes, decriminalized. So, I think it's pretty unbelievable that even in states where it's legal, the NFL will still punish the player for testing positive for something that's legal. But I don't make the NFL rules. Okay? I wish I did, but I don't. And so, if you're a college player and you know that you're going to the NFL Combine, you know they're going to drug test you, and then you smoke weed and then you fail a drug test, then you're an idiot. And how can you think that person can be depended on not to get caught again? So Gregory got a 1-year suspension this time. So if the guy can, stop smoking weed, he could be a huge player for you. We will see. At cornerback, Orlando Scandrick is out. He was the number 3 cornerback, lost his starting job. And Nolan Carroll is out. He was a reserve player. So, you have a few guys on your roster who should be able to play corner. And we'll see. You didn't bring anybody new to replace those guys, but you have some guys already on the roster. And you have the former first-round pick being moved over from safety. So there are some options there at corner. And finally, at safety, there's Marqueston Huff and Eric Pinkins, who are going to be coming in to provide some depth there at safety. So, overall, when you look at the Cowboys roster, I don't know if there's any position that you can say is significantly upgraded over last season. I mean, at linebacker, Jalen Smith will be even healthier and even better. That's huge. If Leighton Vander Esch jumps into the NFL as a superstar, then I guess linebacker might be better. But I don't know if he's going to have a better season than Anthony Hitchens did with 84 tackles and 10 tackles for a loss. At defensive end, I don't see a huge upgrade there. Maybe you upgraded at guard. That's certainly possible. Okay. Tight end, certainly not upgraded. Wide receiver, I don't know. Probably not. Possibly, but probably not. So, the Cowboys should be a decent team this year. They should be a team that's fighting for a playoff spot this year. Are they a team that realistically will probably be able to win the division over the Eagles? Doubt it. I doubt it. Like I said, could they compete for a playoff spot? Absolutely. And real quick, I think that 5 playoff spots are almost locked up. I mean, I see the Eagles, the Saints, the Falcons, the Rams, and the Vikings. They're, nothing is certain in the NFL, but come back and watch this video in January and tell me which of those 5 teams is not in the playoffs. So, could the Cowboys hit that 6th playoff spot? Sure. It's certainly possible. They'll compete against teams like, Green Bay, teams like maybe even San Francisco, Carolina. In fact, I'd say, they are really one of about 4 or 5 teams that has the best chance of getting that final playoff spot. But then again, right, there's 16 teams in the NFC, and I think 5 teams are definitely going to make the playoffs, and, and there's about 5 teams that have a really good shot of being in that final spot, and the Cowboys are one of them. So we'll see what the Cowboys are able to do. You have a great, great offensive line. Is the defense going to be good enough to win enough games to get you in the playoffs? That's the question, in my opinion. Alright, if you like this video, please click subscribe, because let me tell you, we are going to have some great videos. At the end of the preseason, we are going to break down the final roster of all 32 teams, and each week we're going to preview the upcoming week's games, and then in the middle of the week we're going to review the previous week's games. So you don't want to miss it. We're going to have some of the best coverage of the NFL on YouTube, so please click subscribe. Thank you very much.